cohort of dynamic speakers that are going to take us into the conversation of sports washing. Sports washing, what that is, and how is it we as conscious people on the left can combat that. We have all kinds of folk that are familiar faces and familiar voices to many of you who listen to the radio waves. They will be introduced, but I'm just going to send the mic to my dear sister in the struggle, activist, and program manager of WPFW 89.3 FM in DC. Please welcome Katia Stick.
Thank you really quick. We have some literature to give out to you. We have some stuff coming up at the weekend with Friends of Congo. So I'm going to turn it over to Eleanor Goldfield. Eleanor Goldfield, who is, as many of you know, the associate producer of Project Center and the co-host of Project Center. The program WPFW started hearing it now 1 o'clock on Tuesdays. You can catch it on our air, among other places. And our brother here, Maurice Carney, who is the co-founder and executive director of Friends of the Congo. And today is made possible by not only Friends of the Congo, but Project Center, African World Now Project, and he's a Mutali, also does African Now WPFW, as well as Black Alliance for Peace Baltimore. So without further ado, I'm turning it over to Eleanor and Maurice.
Okay, let's get rolling. So I think that everybody here knows that corporate media sucks. But it's also worth noting that even on alternative media sites and stations, it's oftentimes hard to get any legitimate news out of Africa. And so I think I want to start off here by just like a show of hands. Does M23 mean anything to people here? Raise your hand if that sounds familiar, as opposed to just like the letter and numbers. Okay, so I think maybe we'll start there because there's not a lot of people, and I'm not trying to like shame anybody. That shit is very hard to find legitimate information on. So why don't we start first of all with this? I think I'll hand it over to you, Grace. Can you give folks basically like the broad strokes of what actually Rwanda is doing in the Congo, what M23 is, before we even get to the point about sports washing? Because before you get to sports washing, you have to know what the sports are covering.
Thank you. Thank you to Red Emirates for having us here as a part of Congo Week, for Friends of the Congo. And for those of you who just be introduced to Friends of the Congo, we're Pan-African Solidarity Institution based in DC. We've organized around 2 principles for over 2 decades. One is to raise global consciousness about what's transpiring in the Democratic Republic. And the second is to provide support to local institutions, those front lines, organizing for change in the country. And part of the reason why Friends of the Congo launched our efforts in over 2 decades ago is because part of the continent was under assault. There was a war of aggression and plunder that was being led by Congo's neighbors against the Congo's people, with the backing of the United States and other Western powers. The war was a product of the '94 genocide in Rwanda. Where those who committed genocide in Rwanda fled into the Congo. And the Rwandan leadership pursued them under the auspices of protecting its security. However, if you know anything about the Congo, it is arguably the richest country in the world in terms of natural resources. Both precious and strategic resources that are valuable to a wide range of industries, whether you're talking about tech, aerospace, electronics, auto, and probably most importantly, the military industry. So it has minerals like uranium, coltan, cobalt, minerals that you probably haven't heard of, but scientists in the United States, industry figures, they're very clear about the value of these minerals. So when Rwanda and Uganda invaded Congo, it's the first time in 1996, ostensibly to pursue those who committed genocide, but also quickly learned to go after mineral riches that is extracted from the Congo and trade, make available to Western nations, corporations. So they did first in 1996 and
I remember.
installed leadership in the Congo. Leadership wasn't having been installed. Said, well, okay, you install this now, get out. But Rwanda and Uganda didn't want to. So anyways, they did it again in 1998. And the second invasion brought in a whole host of countries. We had southern bloc countries like Zimbabwe, Angola, Namibia, Tanzania, a whole bunch of countries came to the side of the Congolese. So that's where people dubbed that 98 invasion, the first war, African World War. Southern Latin countries were involved in the conflict. And it led to what the United Nations said the deadliest conflict in the world since World War II, where estimated 6 million Congolese perished as a result of that conflict. It was brought to peace accord to an end, the war was brought to an end, the peace accord in 2003. However, the conflict continued, and primarily because Rwanda and Uganda still wanted access to Congo's riches. And they still got the backing of the United States, $150 million a year, the US giving them, US was providing arms, financing, training, equipment, while mass crimes were being committed by these, I guess you could call them proxies or agents of the United States. And when international bodies tried to intervene to insert some level of accountability or to try and bring an end to the impunity, to try and bring some kind of justice to bear on behalf of Congolese people, you see the United States run political cover or diplomatic cover for these countries. Sound familiar? Much like what they do with Israel. So in a lot of respects, Rwanda is like a little Israel in Africa because of the support against the United States, military, equipment, training, a whole bit, but also because of the diplomatic and political power against. So in any case, over the last 3 decades, the same thing has happened where Rwanda in particular, Uganda has continued to destabilize the Congo through proxy militia. A range of them. The last one is M23. And it's not the first time that Rwanda is back in M23. They backed M23 in 2012, where they captured parts of the east of Congo, the major city called Goma. That's when Obama was in office. And it just so happened that President Obama, he was a senator, one of his signature legislation as a senator that got passed into law was on the Congo. Public Law 19456. It's the Democratic Republic of the Congo Relief, Security, and Democracy Promotion Act. And there's a section in that law that he passed as senator that said that if any neighboring country destabilizes the Congo, then the Secretary of State is authorized to withhold aid from that country. Okay? So at the time, Obama, the main sponsor of the law, is the President of the United States. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. She was the co-sponsor of the law. So we mounted the campaign to pressure the Obama administration. It was like a Dear Hillary campaign. Thousands of high school students and college students sent in postcards. Dear Hillary, you said that you co-sponsored this law. Rwanda and Uganda destabilizing the Congo, so why aren't you voting? So eventually, the United States would have $200,000. Not a lot of money. So, but what that did was it sent a signal to European nations when we have tens of millions of dollars. And that resulted in Rwanda withdrawing its soldiers, the M23 being defeated, but they backed up into Rwanda and Uganda. They weren't totally ousted, right? So 2021, end of 2021, Rwanda flipped the switch again. And 23 are back in the Congo. And now they've captured larger territory, large part of eastern Congo, two of the major cities in the east, one city called Goma, another city called about 3 million population. And they've captured major mining sites. One major mining site is a coltan site called Rwanda that is controlled by the M23. And as we speak, the former finance campaign co-chair of the Trump administration, a gentleman by the name of Gentry Beach, he's lined up to get access to the coltan mines, based on the way Trump is engaging in the Congo right now. Let's speak about that. But the main point is that this war of aggression and plunder continues for 3 decades, led primarily by Rwanda and by Rwanda. It's been able to continue mainly because they have the backing of the United States. And they've launched a major propaganda campaign over the years in order to cover for the crimes that are being committed in the Congo, in order to cleanse those crimes. So they've engaged in sponsorship of European football teams, like Arsenal football team, Paris Saint-Germain out of France, Bayern out of Germany, right? And now they've expanded to the United States, Los Angeles Clippers, Los Angeles Rams, and they have a major relationship with National Basketball Association, led primarily by the president of the Toronto Raptors. In addition to the sports, they've also engaged, and I won't say they, meaning the Rwandan government, and primarily Paul Kagame, entertainers like Kendrick Lamar, Dave Chappelle, John Legend, all going to Rwanda, presenting, performing, hobnobbing with Kagame, which presents Rwanda and Kagame as a good global citizen. And it covers for the crimes that they've committed in the Congo and in Rwanda itself. So that's the landscape. It may take a little longer, but I just wanted to paint a picture of what's unfolding, the role of Rwanda and Kagame, the role of the United States, and of course, the role of the sports and entertainment industry, both in the United States and in Europe, in covering for the crimes that have been committed in the Congo, which the United Nations says is the deadliest conflict in the world since World War II.
We also have on the panel Claude Buki, who's from Rwanda. He's a Rwandan genocide survivor, and he can actually expand a bit more of what Maurice was talking about. Hopefully it will work. We had transport issues, that's why he's here. But he's on speaking to us from Tennessee, and hopefully he will give you more information about the role that Rwanda plays in the sports watching. But if you'd like to briefly introduce yourself to everyone.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry to be here and review all let's say my name is Claude King. I am originally from Rwanda. Also, the book Survivors Uncensored, and the book is 500 testimonies from survivors of the Rwanda genocide and post-genocide Rwanda. Inspiring stories of resilience and humanity of that book, a collection of over 100 accounts of survivors. And those accounts include people who survived in Rwanda and also in Congo. So to get involved with the Congo, especially with one being in the middle of this invasion and genocide. It's been unfolding over the last 30 years. I grew up in Rwanda, and at the time I was a child, a young boy. There wasn't much of any kind of military or in person until when Rwanda was invaded by Ugandan troops, many of whom were Rwandan exiles, usually exiled for 30 years. The first time I saw somebody was shooting a movie in Rwanda, I actually think there was a war. That all these black people in Rwanda, that they were some a foreign. Uh, so fast forward, this war starts. It was led by, among others, Paul Kagame. But when the war actually started, Paul Kagame was not in Rwanda. Paul Kagame is the president of Rwanda. He was not in Rwanda. He had actually been exiled for almost 30 years. He went to the top of his parents, went to Uganda, and he was recruited into Museveni for his into the Museveni's when they started the war against the and war Museveni ended up Museveni and his crew, including winning, and they took over Uganda. And so Kagame, along with many other Rwandans, some of whom were recruited as child soldiers, into Museveni's offices. Well, so in 1990, when the war started, Paul Kagame was in the US at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, training a Ugandan soldier. This was October 1st, 1990, and the original leader was also a Ugandan officer. Was killed, and Paul Kagame replaced him, and they fought this war for 4 years. But this was not a ordinary war. It's very similar to what's happening in the Congo today. There were a lot of atrocities committed by these rebels, and this was predominantly Tutsi, which is one of the groups in Rwanda, and predominantly Tutsi rebel. When they came, they were taking off. They used stuff as a weapon for war. They would do things that were really as opening women's lungs. They destroyed schools and hospitals and stadiums and threw grenades into the crowds and then finished them off with hand weapons, including things like and gloves. And it was just horrible that in a small country like Rwanda, one of the smallest countries in the world, and also one of the most densely populated countries in the world. There are almost every country in the world except for Bangladesh. So even a place like China, India with a billion people, square miles than those countries. But with in a country of around 8 million people, be more than 1 million people had been displaced. So if we use one in the country displaced and the genocide started. During this war, there were a lot of things that happened, including political assassinations, government in which was supported by they signed a peace deal, and this peace deal allowed to bring some of their troops, even though they have to stay they brought those troops, and with the help of UN peacekeepers who were there, they were able to smuggle even more troops into the city. The ones who were in that place that they were designated, they actually loved going into the community and they were recruiting people and also bringing more troops into the city. So by April 1994, this was basically what was happening. And the place was very easy for there were weapons everywhere. That for me as a young teen, it would have been cheaper for me to buy than it would be for me to buy a loaf of bread or a bottle of soda. They would assassinate this city president Ghana at the time. And on April 6, 1994, they actually were able to do this. And they that is on his way out of Rwanda. Rwanda was with the president and president for less than 6 months. He was after the president in Russia was assassinated also by the army. So, then after this assassination, which killed two presidents, killed over 1,000 people on the plane, that's what that was basically the genocide. The genocide. You know, two things. One, they continued their goals, and also the massacres, the many massacres they were carrying out. And ultimate issues started going from house to house, finding down Tutsis. My own story during that time, somebody played on a phone, we took shelter in a neighbor's house until it was too unsafe with the bombings and the killings in Kigali. We left Kigali and on our way out. After long travels, we were stopped at a checkpoint and me and my mother was selected to be killed. And they it wasn't until that two men came to different headlines and brought it to the men actually cleaned the courts. There were also local people that spoke up and pleading for us. And I people are the next day I never been to this place before. But actually one said something that which was this little boy and his mom are not coming 5 miles from here, let somebody else kill them. And somehow they that shelter. The bombings and massacres that they are able to carry out as they took over the country. We were pushed into the Congo. I went into Congo as a refugee and found this person with my sisters. And then eventually was as refugees because my father had gone to school in the US.
So Claude, I'm sorry to interrupt, but unfortunately the folks online can't hear you. And I do want to thank you so much for giving us that context and that backstory I just wanted to quickly introduce Mustafa Baba, who's with the Pan-African Forum, who just got here. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah. I think we want to move on, and I want to circle back to something that has been brought up a couple of times here. And in Project Censored, we talk a lot about news framing, and something that we see a lot happening with Rwanda, Israel, is something that I like to call sympathy framing. Like, hey, we couldn't possibly perpetuate a genocide because we were victims of a genocide. And I was wondering if folks on the panel could talk a little bit about this kind of framing, specifically as it relates to the Congo and how Rwanda uses its own, kind of like what Claude was talking about. Just was that related?
Yeah, sure. First of all, my apologies for the, but thank you for this opportunity. I'll start from this point of, when we think perpetrators of genocide, where a lot of times there's so many atrocities going on in so many places where the attention span for people is usually a lot shorter than to dive into details of these atrocities. But when you start looking for patterns, I think that's one of the important things to look at. Is we have a tendency to look at hyperfixate on these atrocities, but we lose sight of the bigger pattern that's going on. So for the Congo's case, Maurice can probably explain this better than I can. But if you take Rwanda, or you typically the Museveni and the Kagame regimes, they've kind of been moving in lockstep with U.S. policy. If we go back even to 2006, invading Somalia, it was TPLF along with Museveni, along with these guys, actually going in and destabilizing Somalia again, and then we started seeing Al-Shabaab and these other groups kind of pop up. So I think that's one of the main things to look at, is these patterns of how, more imperial policy starts creating more extremism and more instability in the continent. You start looking at the pattern across the continent, from West Africa, you have the Sahel region, you have the Horn of Africa, East Africa. Each one of these regions have seen that pattern happen time and time again. Even in Sudan, Bashir was removed by the people in 2019, but then right away in 2020, there was a squeeze from the first Trump administration for Sudan to pay for, all the sins of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, demanding to pay hundreds of millions of dollars, even though these are the same people that removed the Bashir regime that was kind of, gave the safe haven to a lot of the extremists. And not only that, but, insisting on normalizing the visit. Until the civilians came in and said, that's not a decision for us. That's a decision for an elected parliament. And soon after that, the civilians were overthrown by the same forces that are now at war that completely destroyed the country altogether. So that would just be my main thing, is to look at the bigger patterns of how imperial policy has kind of, started these fires.
Well, I just wanted to, because Claude, unfortunately, folks online can't hear you, so I just wanted to, it's hard to hear you here, even with our remarkable tech we have going. So I just wanted to let folks know, Claude, check out his work, his book. And Claude, we hope that you can be here in person with us next time. Thank you so much for calling. And Maurice, would you like to follow up on the sympathy framing question?
Sure. That's been a key, how can I say, element of Kagame and Rwanda escaping accountability. And candidates or policymakers frame it as genocide guilt. They say, well, which is really like it's a poor excuse, right? They say, well, the reason why we don't hold Kagame to account or hasn't been held to account because of genocide. And really, that genocide guilt, quote unquote, right? The US in particular, UK, they milk it themselves because they have their strategic interests. Like nations are not functioning and carrying a policy based on genocide. Right? It's not a genocide guilt that is prompting the US to fund Israel to the tune of billions of dollars, right? Because they have strategic interests, right? Just like they have strategic interests in Western Asia, Israel, they have strategic interests in Central Africa with Rwanda. It's not just the US. I'll just give you an example. The Rwanda government on the Paul Kagame has farmed out its soldiers to Macron in France to go to Mozambique, to protect the interests of Total Energies. It's got natural gas facilities there. So they send Rwandan soldiers to clamp down on a rebel uprising in Mozambique. And in return for Rwanda farming of the soldiers to France and Total Energies, the European Union gave Rwanda 20 million euros in 2023, another 20 million in 2024. So Rwanda does on the continent what the US or Europe may not want to do directly, right? They can have their proxies do that work. Rwanda is the #1 provider of soldiers to UN missions in Africa. They send like Kenya did on the William Ruto, they send their soldiers to Haiti. So they carry out, they're an extension of US policy on the African continent. In addition to that, it's not really well known, but Rwanda, under Paul Kagame, lobbied the French government for its former foreign minister, Louise Mushikiwabo, to become the Secretary General of the Francophonie. Now, many of you may not have heard of Francophonie. The Francophonie is the French corollary to the British Commonwealth. It's an instrument utilized by France to expand or carry out its soft power around the world. Right? So the point is they're firmly ensconced in the expansion of Western interests, whether it's the United States, European Union, France. They are what Rwanda's Paul Kagame is what French would call the national bourgeoisie, or what Thomas Sankara refers to as agents of neocolonialism. So they serve the interests of the empire. So when we talk about this genocide guilt, and it's utilized really as a cover both for Rwanda and its Western backers. Because what Kagame has done is weaponize genocide. Say that because we've been victims of genocide, and it entitles us to act with impunity, even if it means committing genocide itself. Right? And not to expect any kind of accountability for those actions. So that's the extent to which you see that they've utilized that being victims of genocide in order to not only pursue their regional interests, but also serve the cover for the empire to pursue its strategic interests, whether it's in Western Asia or in Central Africa.
Thank you. And Moisa, I wanted to ask you also, because you work your focus is so much on Africa in terms of media. How do you see that there's also this line through omission, right? Because corporate media in the US and in Europe does not talk about this issue, doesn't talk about Sudan, doesn't talk, it didn't talk about the Rwandan genocide when that was happening, and there's this continuation of lying through omission. Could you talk a little bit about that and the work that you do to try to uncover that and push this to the front?
Thank you. I think I'll talk about the little bit and then also bring in bring in the connections. Sometimes I wonder why we always get surprised at why the corporate media doesn't cover it. The name itself, corporate media, it tells you everything. So we have to, because when we look at especially the work I've been doing for these years, the media has never been in the interest of the people in the African story. Really. It's always been used by the regime in the United States to present a certain image for the United States to make sure that the continent is perpetually under its control. And that's very blatant when you look at the situation in South Africa. It's so obvious for many people that the media always made sure that they would say, if they're talking about Nelson Mandela, use the word terrorist, but then they would say the leaders of the minority regime, the Nationalist Party, they'll give you their proper title. It would be President Botha, who was the Prime Minister Botha, who was the architect of the party, or Prime Minister Botha. I mean, they wouldn't put they wouldn't have something which would describe him in humanistic terms. And I say that on purpose because I think sometimes the simple words are the ones which are most important when the story is being pronounced, particularly when the African story. We actually did this analysis when I was at Trans Africa, coverage of media and how words are used. Like when people talk about, even when Claude was saying small African countries, kind of hesitant. Say, well, Rwanda is the size of America. Rwanda is the size of is bigger than Belgium, which was this so-called colonial power. When we look at even Congo, it's the size of Europe, Western Europe. It's the size of the United States, from Mississippi to the East Coast. And I'm doing that deliberately is just kind of understanding how this becomes so ingrained so that when you're putting in policies which are going to harm the people already have a negative or descriptive term about the people there that is seen as not even exotic, but even not human, and the places of policy. It's a long way to answer the question, but I think especially when even people talk about the heart of darkness and all that, and that plays its role. It's been this long, consistent role of how the media is played in policy in the United States, and that's why. And media, in the United States is interesting. Media is the system. To the point where people are interconnected personally with the power structure. So we shouldn't expect the media to be different. I think the mistake we make is that we think that the media is going to be something that's going to tell the truth, especially for Africans. No, it doesn't. It's at least for that. I look at it. It's more the people push the media or community stations to do other things. And so when they're telling the story about Congo, they're not going to tell you who are the people making the money, the Apples of the world, the Bill Gates and other people who are making the money from the suffering of the people. They'll do it by happenstance and stories here and there, but it won't be systematic dissecting of this, how people here talked about it. And it's a continuation. I mean, the media started the war, the Spanish American War. The media started in the Iraq War. So why are we surprised when the Iraq War happened? Like they're the ones who created and that was William Brandt first. Was it William Brandt first? Was it first? Yeah, the people. Also, the media has never been, at least in this system, of the truth. The Watergate was two journalists who happened to write the story. But if it was up to the owner of the Washington Post, I don't think that story would have been out. But she was very closely, Catherine Graham was a close friend of Richard Nixon. And there's no way, so it's interesting how we prepare the media as being the savior. The people are the people who push the media to cover the story. But the media has been continuously controlled by the power structure, and especially in Congo, and it leads me to Sudan and Congo. If you could add a little bit about how we connect Sudan and Congo and Rwanda in this story, because we don't see it in the press and the UAE. Like it's supposed to we can add.
I think you're 100% right. You know, a lot of times when we don't see corporate media covering the story, it's because once you follow the money on those stories and you follow the guns and the geopolitics, it starts to become clear. You know, you can't tell the story of Sudan, the war that's going on. It's the biggest humanitarian crisis on the planet right now, but it's not being covered because you also have to explain what the heck happened in Libya. You know, you have to explain why Sudan was on the 7 countries in 5 years list that General Wesley Clark talked about, and what happened. You know, the U.S. went into Afghanistan, they went into Iraq, and then the second leg of that was Libya, and then squeezing Sudan and forcing it to go into the fold of Middle Eastern countries, rather than let it become within its natural environment. But it's the policies of like everything from counterterrorism to all of the austerity measures that were kind of, you know, imposed by the IMF, by the World Bank, you know, the war in Yemen, you know, the UAE and Saudi Arabia were recruiting from some of the poorest places in Sudan and actually militarizing entire communities. So you can't talk about the war in Sudan without talking about these factors. And some journalist in like NBC or CNN is not going to spend the time to go into that. And if they do, they're going to meet opposition from their editorial board, from the intelligence community that's squeezing their editorial board. Like these kind of dynamics kind of pile up and, you know, make a crisis like Sudan invisible to the world. But, you know, if you take even one country that's involved in that war, you know, the UAE. The UAE has the ability to buy off politicians in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and in the United States. You know, they're the closest allies of Israel. So basically, they have an open checkbook and unlimited access to coerce any political opposition to what they're doing, not only in Sudan, but in Libya, in Somalia, in a lot of places that we see, you know, immense human suffering. You see these entities that are kind of untouchable when it comes to corporate media. So we gotta thank Melissa and WPFW and these warriors for, you know, shedding light and helping us actually articulate these wars and what's going on, because I think that's the only way to go. And, you know, the alternative media right now is gaining a lot of momentum. It's become the media for a lot of people. So I think we just need to kick in the door a little bit on these bigger outlets and try to get the word out as much as possible.
Thanks. So I want to start wrapping up here, and I think one of the themes that I'm really hearing, which I think is so important, is the connection of stories, right? And we oftentimes, we're just like, oh, we're just talking about the Congo, or we're just talking about Sudan, if, of course, we as in the US is even talking about it. But I think what's really important there is that it's meant to be separated because it keeps not only us in the dark mentally, but it keeps us from connecting issues wherever we are. And it keeps us from building that solidarity, whether that be Pan-Africanism or whether that be solidarity across borders here in so-called the United States. And so I want to wrap up here by talking about the US role, right? And how we as children of empire, we who live here, have a role because the US has a role in what's going on in the Congo, what's going on in Sudan, and just basically Africa and the so-called third world. which I hate that term, but that's another soapbox. So, Maurice, I was wondering if you could talk about here with, wrapping up here with this connection of issues as it pertains to the U.S. role. What is the U.S. role in the Congo? What are they purposely keeping from us with regards to what the U.S. has in interest in the Congo?
Thanks for the question. Maybe, I know we're short on time, so maybe I can answer that with responding to questions.
Yeah, first question right here, actually.
First of all, thank you to all panelists for bringing a wealth of important information. Much of which I've heard that you can hear again, and you brought even new things which I didn't realize in terms of the historical context. We're going to move into questions and answers, and there's a lot that we can talk about here. The time is against us on Sunday afternoon, so we just want to remind ourselves to keep questions and comments relatively brief and relatively truncated, and I will feel myself will come around to the microphone with you. So first, let me just see hands in terms of who might have a question or comment. As people are thinking, given so much context, and want to bring it back and dive a little bit deeper into the sports side, because all the things that you have talked about, we should be more known. We've already discussed a number of the ways why they're not more known. This teaching the history, the whitewash over it that the media does, and the setting rosters and so forth. We know that sports is one of those things. And so, in terms of, for example, football federations, soccer federations of the countries, and their relationship to FIFA in terms of the governing body, we know that FIFA has, for instance, banned Israel in the way that it should. Just to take an example. We know that many of the federations of the countries are very much supported by repressive governments to take only, not only the people of the country's minds away from what's going on, but also and outside. I was just wondering, in terms of some of your own interaction of work that you've done in terms of Congo and Rwanda and what have you, how have you seen that play out as far as government's use of sports is concerned? And I guess the part two of that is, where do you see athletes in these countries actually daring to speak out, especially the countries that we've been talking about today? Where have you seen athletes, national team athletes or what have you, or particular local clubs raising their voices against the government shenanigans that you're talking about?
And if you have a question, hold your hand up and I'll come to you.
I can speak briefly. In the world of sports, I think with soccer, football in general, the money is mostly in the European clubs, and now kind of, there's a lot of Middle Eastern clubs, rising up. But the crux of it is the European club. And that's why you see Emirates Stadium in London. I believe it's Arsenal. And you see, the World Cup, there might be a vote to ban Israel, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But I think the best way to look at it is to start targeting the sports clubs themselves and the players. The NBA now they have like, I think, a few games or something in Dubai. Dubai has been this huge destination for a lot of celebrities, for a lot of sports. We've seen the recent comedy festival in Riyadh and Saudi Arabia, and comedians going at each other over that. I think it needs to be more of a conversation of following that money. What else is the UAE money actually going into? And putting these players, whether it's on the celebrity level or the team level, into that. I don't think people should put their eggs in that basket, entertainment and sports and stuff like that is changes on a dime, and it's not as sustainable as kind of working on the grassroots level, working with unions and working with grassroots groups and organizations and stuff to create more of an organic pressure from the ground up. Can we make a dent if people start looking at sports and clubs and celebrities and among the fans? Because that's one of the main, I think, advantages is that the fans for international soccer or football, they're starting to interact right now, finally, after decades of being apolitical. The Israel genocide is playing a part right now in how the soccer world is talking and how they're conducting themselves. But I think there just needs to be a push within that direction, but I wouldn't hold my breath for any tangible results in that world, the sports and entertainment world. But it is worth a try, and it's worth doing campaigning.
Yeah, I concur with that. Just quickly, for example, the Arsenal football team, Friends of the Congo is working with Arsenal fans. They're called Gunners for Arsenal. And they've been leading campaigns to pressure the football team to sever its relationship with the Rwandan government. So working with the fans at the bottom up is an ideal, way to move and approach for applying pressure. It's an opportunity to educate the fans as well. By the same token, when John Legend decided to go to Rwanda this summer against all the pressure that we were putting on, people with his family were putting on, to the point he went ahead anyways. Tennis player from Nigeria didn't go, but John Legend did. However, even though he went, he still had to respond to the question. He had to explain himself to BBC about why he went. And he basically said, well, I didn't want to deprive Rwandan people of, their entertainment, being gay. So the bottom up with the fans is definitely a tactic that is born, of fruit.
Yes. What role does the African Union play these days in all of these issues that you've been talking about?
Well, the African Union, just to kind of take a step back and look at it, it's made up of the governments of the same countries, a lot of them that are actually committing these atrocities. So there is a tug of war within the African Union. But with something like Sudan, for example, you have over 13 million people displaced. The magnitude of the crisis itself has forced the African Union to sit down and say, okay, you as the army and the RSF, you are not qualified at all after everything that happened with the war. You are not going to control the fate of the Sudanese. It's more common sense approach. What the African Union is doing right now, they're bringing all of the Sudanese political factions and resistance movements to the table in order to start carving out some sort of dialogue to stop the war. And that's because even when you look at the African Union, some countries are closer to the RSF, some are closer to SAF. You have countries within the African Union that are always butting heads, like Egypt and Ethiopia. Both of them are bordering Sudan. So you have these kind of complications within the African Union. But at least kind of, having setting, even the US and, Saudi Arabia and all the countries that are directly kind of involved with the negotiation process in Sudan, they're handing off the whole political dialogue and everything to the African Union. There's a long standing conviction that we need African solutions for African problems. And the African solutions, we we wish that AU, politically and, incentive to solve these problems, but again, it's not, it's very far from being a perfect body, but at least fostering that dialogue is the main track of African Union.
Just quickly around the Congo. But even for the Congo, the African Union, many of its requirements are primarily funded by the West. So that should give you a sense of where their policies lead. But in the case of the Congo, African Union, and particularly what they call the Rwanda courts, Rwanda and Angola, to try and bring about peace, some kind of peace given the Congo. And Rwanda walked out of those negotiations in December 2024. Since that time, the Trump administration, which to respond to the question, has jumped in, where the Trump administration is now taking the lead on the peace effort, quote-unquote peace effort in the Congo. In part because, or primarily around the interests around minerals. And started this year when Zelensky, Ukraine, balked at this mineral security deal between the Trump administration and Ukraine, the Congolese president jumped in and said, hey, Felix Tshisekedi, we have minerals here in Congo. Let's enter into a mineral security deal between the Congo and the United States. And the Trump administration responded to that. So they appointed a special advisor. They had talks, and there was a peace accord signed in the State Department this June 27th of this year. And following the peace accords, it's supposed to be a meeting in the White House between the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, and the president of the Felix Tshisekedi. And that's supposed to lay the foundation for an aspect of the peace deal that was signed in Washington, what they call Washington Accord, which is regional integration, economic integration. Basically, the Trump administration is saying to the president of Rwanda, President DRC, you guys get together, establish a peace deal, and we're going to bring U.S. investors in to the tune of billions of dollars, right? So you have like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Michael Bloomberg, all rushing in to get access to minerals in the Congo. They raised $1 billion over this year in a company called Cobalt, where they can get access to lithium in the southeast of the Congo. And then you have Eric Prince, former Blackwater, who's putting up his security firm to defend the mines in the Congo. He had divisions of the U.S. government, Export-Import Bank, International Finance Development Corporation, put together $2.5 billion along with the Wall Street hedge fund California in order to back the security investment. So, and I mentioned to you earlier, one of Trump's campaign finance co-chair, Gentry Beach, he's lined up to pursue coltan. So just a host of folks in the billionaire class, people that we know that are gearing up to go after those critical minerals in the Congo, not only to serve U.S. corporate interests, but also to compete with China, because China has the lion's share of the copper and cobalt. So there's a geostrategic battle unfolding in the Congo right now that far surpasses what the African Union can bring to the table. And that's all combined with Qatar, who they're looking to invest about $21 billion. They also are part of the peace deal. So you just, what's unfolding is consistent with the history of the Congo, where you have major corporations, foreign governments, all going in to try and capture the wealth. And we've seen it probably most explicitly with this Israeli gentleman by the name of Dan Gerler, who became a billionaire after the Congo, where he has access to minerals in the Congo, and he gets about $200,000 a day in royalties from his concessions. And if you compare the $200,000 he gets a day to about 70 million Congolese people who live on less than $2.15. One Israeli billionaire, $200,000 a day. 70 million Congolese people, less than $2.15 a day. So it's a country that's being robbed across the board.
I have this gentleman here, and then I'm going to come over. No, come here. Okay, then I have this one, and then I think we have to give it back to.
Hello, good afternoon. My question is basically about the connection of religion and the sports arena, because I remember watching a documentary about what's going on with the National Day of Prayer Breakfast in the White House, and how those Republican families fund churches in Uganda and in other countries, and a lot of sports players go to those churches and they unknowingly fund the things that are going on there. My question is, how can African American religious institutions fight against that sort of rhetoric? Because I know a lot of African American, religious institutions, the Christian, feed into the evangelical things that go on that actually affect.
So, you gonna answer the question, or you're waiting for the other question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wanted to thank you for doing this event because for, all the information you shared, all the connections you're making. This is like a rare time when I think a recent poll said that almost half of Americans think what's happening in Israel is a genocide. And they're obviously not getting that information from the history, right? Relying on independent media and social media. So it's a unique time when Americans are really thinking about what U.S. foreign policy is doing. So for the folks here, what can we do to better educate and make those connections for folks? I was at the King's rally yesterday, talking to people. For the first time, you see a huge amount of Americans understanding that while Trump might be banned, that's what's happening. There's problems so much deeper, or at least opening and to hear it and see this connection.
In terms of the faith question, we believe the Friends of Congo collaborated with faith institutions throughout the country to mobilize in support of the people, writ large, Congolese people. You have churches like Trinity United Church of Christ, Chicago, formerly run by Jeremiah Wright. So you all remember the controversy in the Obama administration. That's the right. So that the church has a history going back to anti-apartheid. Jeremiah Wright being on the forefront. You have Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. You have Global Ministries in the United Church of Christ. Probably in the area that's represented by Plymouth Congregation. So they've been engaged in educating their congregation in terms of what to do. They bring us in to speak to their congregation. They screen films. We have a host of films that they screen for their congregation in an effort to educate them about what's happening in the Congo in general, which is different from what you're talking about. Is like the families, yeah, the families, the collection of members of Congress, who they call themselves family, and encourage you to visit the books we've got, where they're part of that evangelical network, and they project their faith on Africa through Uganda and other countries, and they invite those leaders from African countries here for the prayer breakfast every January, each January, I believe. At the start of the year. So the point is just to let you know that there's a grassroots component as well. It's, by virtue of their work that they do, education helps to combat what the family is doing. I forget the question, in terms of what we can do, the other one, there's so many things we do right now, for us. We're in the midst of Congo Week. I encourage everybody to go to CongoWeek.org. It's a global teach-in and a week of global teaching and action around the Congo. Every day starting from today, October 19th through the 25th. on our socials and Congo Friends on YouTube and X and Instagram. You'll be able to tune in. And in fact, we're streaming this event live today, to hear from voices from the ground. Those on the front lines in the Congo who are organizing to bring about change in the country. So it's an opportunity for you to learn and to participate. We also have campaigns that we're running through. Sportswashing. Amnesty International has a petition out right now, petitioning the NBA to sever its ties with the Rwandan government. If any of you are connected, we're also reaching out to fans of the Rams and the Clippers in order to put pressure on, first to educate them about why they shouldn't be the team should be in relationship with the Rwandan government. But those are some of the immediate things that we're doing, get involved in. But we encourage you to go to freecongo.org. That's a website, freecongo.org. And as soon as you get there, there's like a host of actions that you can take. Supporting humanitarian projects on the ground, signing up to be a part of the movement, inviting us to your communities. That's just like we've been invited here today to Arab Emirates, the bookstore that is community space that is creating an environment where we can come in and share information and enable you to take actions. And so there's just a host of things that you can do, but if you go to freecongo.org, it's a lot of steps and actions that you can take for that.
Yeah, here, real quick, we have one point and then Eleanor to wrap.
My name is Paul Humphrey, and I'm one of the co-founders of Friends of the Congo. But back in 1995, I happened to be in Haiti, and I ended up in a meeting with the U.S. ambassador. And I asked him a very simple question: what was his history of the State Department? And I encourage you to go look up his name on the internet, and you will verify what I'm getting ready to say. He was in Congo, Rwanda when there was a coup. Then he went to Liberia when there was a coup. Then he went to South Africa right before Nelson Mandela became president, in which he encouraged the white regime to spend all the money in the budget. So Mandela made the military or the police with men above that. So now Mandela has to negotiate with the international banks, which create all kinds of restrictions on what he couldn't do as president. He leaves South Africa and he goes to Nigeria. There's a coup. He leaves Nigeria and comes down to Haiti in 1994, when he received was returned from a coup. In 1998, when I'm back in Haiti, I'm asked by my Haitian friends, what's this other guy nowadays? He said, oh, he's not here anymore. Where is he? He's in the Congo. When there was an attempted military coup. But it wasn't successful, so he stays on as ambassador. And actually stays there until January 20th, 2001. Of course, the president of the Congo was killed January 16, 2001. So, I mean, when people kind of challenge, well, you have to do this and doesn't do that, all you have to do is look up William Sweaty on the internet and look at his history. And then see the fact that the United States has played a major role in coups throughout the world, especially in the African world. And one last thing, in 2006, I was an international observer to the elections in the Congo. And I bet you now, yes, the group was charged with the UN operations and supervised the election in Congo in 2006. Where it went. So there's a direct connection to how textiles are being used in our governments and using elections to handpick who they want to have as president in the countries in Africa.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just look up Patrice Lumumba's The IA and just read for a bit. You'll see that this has been going on for quite some time. Colonialism is the battering ram of capitalism is what I like to say. And before we wrap up, first of all, thank you so much for coming out to Red Emma's. Thank you so much to Red Emma's for hosting us. If you have a minute before they close, check out their books, they're amazing. And before we wrap up, can folks just say, we know friends of the Congo, but if there's a place where people can find y'all's work?
SudanSolidarity.com. All one word. SudanSolidarity.com. There's a lot of initiatives over there, mutual aid, supporting farmers, all the kind of stuff to kind of support the grassroots.
You can follow us on first our show, which is Africa Now. We see every Wednesdays, 1:00, and then we also have you can also Instagram Africa Roll Out Project. And then we have a number of educational programs that we do, really little investments.
And if I could just real quickly, we want to thank Project Center too for being our work. Sure, that's projectcenter.org. And please, we're in our fall pitch drive, and you can actually start to do well. But please support independent media. Please support WPFW. Tell where we can do this work. We also have a benefit concert coming up with Friends of Congo and WPFW. Part of the proceeds will go to WPFW. The other part will go to a women's center in Kinshasa. So I have information, and I'll be right at the door, so on your way out to see me. And I'm going to turn it over to our gracious host. Thank you all so much for coming out.
Thank you to each of our panelists. It is a wealth of information. It is necessary information. We all take and run. And add to, you've heard a couple of people mention that you get it to the bookstore, and you have time now after our adjournment to do that. Many things, obviously, that dovetail with today's conversation, things going on from everywhere to the Lumumba to general U.S. Interference around the world. I think I should particularly lift up, if you have not read Sudan Sakara's Cobalt Red, then you definitely want to go ahead and get a copy of that. There's one copy there, and we will show it to you when we get to the bookstore. Do follow each of these organizations. I mentioned earlier that you can find out all of Red Emma's events on the website. Hopefully I'll see you Tuesday for the rules for reactionaries, how to maintain inequality and stop social justice. I guess we speak there in the title. Leva Bowles' book, In Conversation with Sharon about Andron Orihuela. So many more I can talk about, and of course, the next Red Emma's Mother Earth Poetry 5, our Life of Peace, Justice Poetry, is November 1st at 6 p.m. featuring Robert Owens. The hot stove is closed off now, but please go ahead and get a dessert or a drink. Thank you so much for coming. Please continue to support my favorite radio station, 89.3 FM WPFW. Continue to support the store, continue to support all of these organizations. One more big radio, let's round of applause for the panel on Sportswashing.
Reese.